Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we're pulling back the curtain on what can only be described as a coordinated assault on accountability in American immigration enforcement.
I'm Maya Clarity, and what we're about to share with you isn't just news. It's a pattern. When federal agents can kill an American citizen in broad daylight and their own identities remain hidden from the top prosecutor in the city where it happened, we're not living in a democracy anymore. We're living in something else entirely.
Tonight, we're covering 5 interconnected stories that reveal how immigration and customs enforcement has become an agency operating beyond the reach of local law, beyond transparency, and increasingly, beyond basic human decency. From the killing of Alex Pretti in Minneapolis to a father denied the right to bury his own son, these stories demand your attention.
We'll also be looking at how the federal government is cynically exploiting a historical tragedy while ignoring its own lessons, the shell game being played with ICE leadership in Minnesota, and a practical guide that citizen journalists are using to identify the agents operating in their communities. This is Truth Report, and the truth is exactly what they don't want you to hear.
Let's start in Minneapolis, where the Intercept is reporting on a story that should terrify every American regardless of your politics. On what should have been a routine day, federal immigration agents shot and killed Alex Pretti, a United States citizen, during an enforcement operation. And here's where it gets disturbing: Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty, the top prosecutor in Minneapolis, still doesn't know who pulled the trigger.
Let that sink in for a moment, Alex. The chief law enforcement officer for a major American county, someone with the legal authority to bring criminal charges, cannot identify the federal agents who killed a man in her jurisdiction. This isn't happening in some authoritarian regime overseas. This is Minneapolis, Minnesota, in 2026.
According to the Intercept's reporting, Moriarty has been actively working to collect and preserve evidence despite what she describes as federal obstruction. The county attorney's office is taking steps that local officials across the country are watching closely, because what's happening in Minneapolis is likely coming to their communities next.
The federal government has essentially created a class of law enforcement officers who operate with complete anonymity even when they kill American citizens. Think about that framework. Local police officers wear name tags and badge numbers. They're accountable to local elected officials. Their disciplinary records can be subpoenaed. But these federal agents exist in a shadow where normal rules of accountability simply don't apply.
The Intercept also spoke with Jill Garvey about how community members can safely document ICE operations without putting themselves at risk. This is crucial information because when the government won't police itself, citizens are increasingly becoming the only witnesses to what's actually happening on our streets.
What strikes me about this case is the deliberate nature of the information blackout. This isn't a case of records being slow to process or bureaucratic delays. Federal authorities are actively refusing to identify agents involved in a killing. They're treating the identity of government employees as classified information, as if the public has no right to know who is authorized to use lethal force in their neighborhoods.
Mary Moriarty is in an impossible position, and she knows it. She has the legal responsibility to investigate potential crimes in her jurisdiction, but the federal government is essentially telling her that its agents are above her authority. This is a constitutional crisis hiding in plain sight, Maya.
And let's be clear about who Alex Pretti was. He was an American citizen. He had constitutional rights. He had due process protections. None of that mattered when federal agents decided to use lethal force. The question every American should be asking is, if this can happen to him, what's protecting any of us?
The steps Moriarty is taking to preserve evidence could become a model for local prosecutors nationwide. She's essentially building a legal framework for holding federal agents accountable when the federal government itself refuses to do so. But she's doing it without the cooperation of the very agencies whose conduct she's investigating.
This brings us to our second story, and it's about historical memory and institutional hypocrisy. The Intercept is reporting that ICE is commemorating a 1948 plane crash that killed deportees being sent to Mexico, the same tragedy that Guthrie wrote his famous song Deportee about. But the way ICE is handling this commemoration reveals everything about how the agency views the immigrants in its custody.
For those who don't know, in January 1948, a plane carrying 28 Mexican farm workers being deported from California crashed in Los Gatos Canyon. All passengers were killed. The newspapers at the time didn't even bother to report the victims' names. They were listed simply as deportees, rendered nameless even in death.
Guthrie was so moved by this dehumanization that he wrote Deportee, Plane Wreck at Los Gatos, a song that named the unnamed and demanded that we see these workers as human beings. Is this the best way we can grow our big orchards? Is this the best way we can grow our good fruit? To fall like dry leaves to rot on my topsoil and be called by no name except deportee? Those lyrics are as relevant today as they were 78 years ago.
Here's the bitter irony the Intercept exposes. ICE is now using this tragedy, this moment that Guthrie transformed into a protest against the dehumanization of immigrants, as some kind of institutional memorial. But the agency is repeating the exact same dehumanization that Guthrie condemned.
We're seeing it right now in how ICE discusses the people in its custody. They're aliens. They're illegals. They're statistics in deportation quotas. Their bodies on planes being flown out of the country with minimal oversight. The lesson of Los Gatos wasn't just that a plane crashed. It was that we as a society had stopped seeing certain people as human. And ICE, by its very structure and culture, perpetuates that same blindness.
The cognitive dissonance is staggering. An agency that conducts mass deportation operations, that separates families, that holds people in detention facilities with documented patterns of abuse, is somehow commemorating victims of a deportation flight while running its own deportation flights. It's like Philip Morris sponsoring a lung cancer awareness campaign.
And this isn't ancient history we're talking about. According to the Intercept's reporting, the conditions and attitudes that led to the Los Gatos tragedy haven't fundamentally changed. Migrants in ICE custody die. They die from medical neglect. They die from suicide. They die in ways that never make the evening news. And their names, like the names of those 28 workers in 1948, often go unreported.
Woody Guthrie's song was an act of resistance against institutional forgetting. He refused to let those workers be erased. What ICE is doing now is co-opting that resistance while continuing the very practices Guthrie condemned. It's not a memorial. It's a public relations exercise designed to give the agency a human face it hasn't earned.
Now we need to talk about Mar Tarabishi, because his story represents everything that's wrong with how this agency treats families. Alex, this one is hard to even discuss without anger.
The Intercept reports that Mar Tarabishi was a father who spent years caring for his ill son. Well, he was a caregiver. He was a father doing what fathers do. Then ICE arrested him. His son's condition worsened. And when Weil died, his father made a simple, human request: let me attend my son's funeral.
ICE denied that request. According to the reporting, the officer handling the case was initially working to make it happen. Then, quote, the officer informed me that his director stepped in and told him that Mar would not be allowed to attend Weil's burial. A director. An administrator sitting in an office somewhere made the decision that this father would not say goodbye to his son.
Let's be absolutely clear about what this means. This wasn't a security decision. This wasn't about flight risk or public safety. This was cruelty as policy. This was an agency demonstrating that it has the power to deny basic human dignity, and choosing to exercise that power for no discernible reason other than because it could.
I want people listening to imagine this. Your child has died. You're in custody. All you want is to stand at the grave. To say goodbye. To have that one final moment as a parent. And some bureaucrat you've never met, whose name you'll probably never know, says no. That's the system we've built.
The Tarabishi case is happening in Texas, but it could happen anywhere ICE operates. And that's the point. The agency's culture has become one where basic compassion is treated as weakness, where exceptions for humanity are seen as threats to enforcement. There's no law that required ICE to deny this request. There's no regulation that mandates cruelty at funerals. This is a choice.
And it's a choice that reveals institutional character. When an organization's first instinct is to deny a grieving father access to his son's burial, that organization has lost any claim to moral authority. This isn't law enforcement. This is something else. This is punishment disguised as procedure.
We reached out to ICE for comment on the Tarabishi case. We wanted to understand the reasoning. We wanted to know what possible justification could exist. But that's the thing about agencies that operate without accountability. They don't have to explain themselves. They don't have to justify their cruelty. They just have to enforce.
Now let's turn to Minneapolis again, because there's been a shakeup in ICE leadership that's being celebrated in some circles. But as the Intercept reports, the celebration might be premature.
Greg Bovino, the ICE official who oversaw operations in Minnesota, has been ousted. Community activists and immigrant rights advocates who have been documenting his aggressive enforcement tactics saw this as a victory. People who had been organizing against his policies felt like their voices had been heard.
But here's the reality check the Intercept delivers. Bovino's replacement is Tom Homan, a national figure known as one of the most aggressive deportation hardliners in modern American history. The most notable difference between Homan and Bovino, as the reporting makes clear, is that Homan has deported a lot more people and done it at a national scale.
This is the classic shell game that federal agencies play. When a local official becomes too controversial, too much of a lightning rod, you swap them out. But you don't change the policy. You don't reform the approach. You just change the face while keeping the same machinery running at full speed.
Tom Homan isn't some moderate brought in to smooth things over. This is the architect of family separation policies. This is someone who has publicly defended zero-tolerance enforcement without apology. Bringing him in isn't a reform. It's an escalation.
And this is where Minnesotans need to pay close attention. Bovino was a local problem. Homan is a national problem now being deployed locally. The infrastructure of aggressive enforcement isn't being dismantled. It's being upgraded. It's being professionalized. It's being put under the control of someone who has proven he can execute mass deportations without flinching.
The celebration over Bovino's departure is understandable. He represented something visible and local that communities could organize against. But Holman represents the industrialization of deportation. He represents an approach that has been tested, refined, and scaled at the national level. This isn't a victory. It's a changing of the guard.
We should also note that this leadership change happened without any fundamental reform of how ICE operates in Minnesota. The policies that led to aggressive enforcement under Bovino are still in place. The targeting of community members is still happening. The raids are still occurring. The only thing that's changed is who's signing the orders.
This brings us to perhaps the most practical piece of journalism The Intercept has produced on this issue, a visual guide to identifying the patches worn by ICE and CBP agents operating in communities across the country.
Here's why this matters. When federal agents show up in your neighborhood, they're often not clearly identified. They wear tactical gear. They sometimes operate in unmarked vehicles. They blend into the landscape of law enforcement in ways that make it difficult for ordinary citizens to know who's actually conducting operations.
The Intercept's guide breaks down the various patches and insignias worn by different divisions and units within ICE and Customs and Border Protection. This includes enforcement and removal operations, homeland security investigations, border patrol, and the various tactical units that conduct raids.
This is citizen journalism meeting practical resistance. If you know what to look for, you can document which agencies are operating in your community. You can alert neighbors. You can provide information to legal observers and rights organizations. You become a witness in a system that depends on lack of witnesses.
The guide explains the difference between CBP and ICE patches, how to identify special units like BORTAC, which is Border Patrol's tactical unit, and what the various department seals and insignias mean. This is information that transforms community members from passive observers into active documenters.
And documentation matters, because as we've seen with the Alex Pretti case, federal agencies are not interested in being held accountable. The only way to create accountability is to create records. To photograph. To video. To note badge numbers and patch designs. To build an evidentiary record that can't be denied or hidden later.
The Intercept specifically notes that this guide was created to help the public determine which federal agents are in their communities. This is journalism serving its most essential function, giving people the tools they need to understand and document what their government is doing.
Now, Maya, let's connect these 5 stories because they're not separate incidents. They're facets of the same institutional failure.
Absolutely, Alex. What we're seeing across all of these reports is an agency that has been allowed to operate without meaningful oversight for so long that it has developed a culture of impunity. From killing American citizens to denying funeral attendance to grieving fathers, from cynically exploiting historical tragedies to shuffling hardline leadership, the pattern is consistent.
The thread connecting Alex Pretti's killing to Mar Tarabishi's grief is the same thread that connects the Los Gatos tragedy to today's deportation operations. It's a fundamental failure to see certain human beings as fully human. It's a bureaucratic culture that processes people rather than serving them.
And the response from federal authorities to all of this has been the same: stonewalling. Deny information. Refuse to identify agents. Make no explanations. Offer no apologies. Treat every question as a threat to operational security rather than a legitimate democratic inquiry.
This is what happens when an agency is given a mandate and resources without accountability. ICE has been told to enforce immigration law. It has been given billions of dollars. It has been equipped with tactical gear and surveillance technology. But at no point has anyone with authority said, and by the way, you also have to treat people humanely.
The Biden administration said it would reform ICE. It didn't. The Trump administration has promised to unleash ICE. It has. And now we have an agency that operates like a paramilitary force within American borders, answerable to no local authority, identified by no name when it kills, and capable of denying a dying man's father the right to attend a funeral.
The Tom Holman appointment tells us everything about where this is heading. This isn't an agency being reformed. This is an agency being accelerated. The machinery of mass deportation is being rebuilt stronger, and the people building it have no interest in the human costs.
Which is why journalism like The Intercepts is so vital right now. When federal agencies won't answer questions, reporters have to keep asking. When agents won't identify themselves, community members have to document patches. When prosecutors are stonewalled, they have to build their own evidence.
And why shows like this one matter? Because every story we've covered tonight would have been buried if someone hadn't dug it out. Alex Pretti's killing would be a statistic. Mar Tarabishi's grief would be invisible. The hypocrisy of ICE commemorating Los Gatos would go unexamined. The Bovino to Holman shuffle would be reported as personnel news rather than policy continuity.
The question for everyone watching tonight is, what are you going to do with this information? These aren't just news stories. These are invitations to act. To document. To organize. To demand accountability from your local officials about what federal agencies are doing in your communities.
Mary Moriarty in Minneapolis is showing what local resistance can look like. She's a prosecutor who refuses to accept that federal agents are above her jurisdiction. She's building cases without federal cooperation. She's preserving evidence even when the federal government wants that evidence to disappear.
That model of local resistance needs to spread. County attorneys, sheriffs, city councils, school boards. Every local institution that interacts with federal immigration enforcement needs to decide whose side they're on. Are they going to facilitate an agency that denies fathers the right to bury their sons? Or are they going to demand something better?
Before we go, we want to be clear about what's at stake. This isn't a debate about immigration policy. You can believe the border should be more secure and still be horrified by an agency that kills American citizens and won't identify the agents involved. You can believe in enforcement and still recognize that denying funeral attendance is cruelty without purpose.
What we're talking about is accountability. We're talking about transparency. We're talking about the basic premise that in a democracy, government agents should be identifiable and answerable for their actions. If we give that up for immigration enforcement, we've given it up for everything.
The same culture that allows ICE to operate in shadows, that permits anonymous agents to kill without identification, that denies fathers the right to bury their children, that culture doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It becomes the norm. It infects other agencies and other areas of law enforcement.
So document what you see. Learn those patches. Support local journalists who are asking hard questions. Support prosecutors like Mary Moriarty who refuse to accept federal stonewalling. Make this an issue that elected officials have to answer for.
That's our show for tonight. I'm Alex Truth. We covered the killing of Alex Pretti and the unprecedented refusal to identify the federal agents responsible. We covered Woody Guthrie's song and ICE's shameful exploitation of the tragedy it commemorated. We covered Mar Tarabishi and the bureaucratic cruelty that denied him his son's funeral. We covered the shell game of leadership changes in Minneapolis. And we gave you tools to identify the agents operating in your communities.
I'm Maya Clarity. This has been Truth Report. The truth doesn't report itself, and neither does accountability create itself. Both require people who refuse to look away. Thank you for watching.